Little House on the Prairie series by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Book 8, These Happy Golden Years. Chapter 15, Mary Comes Home. Laura was so glad to be at home again, out on Pa's claim. It was good to milk the cow and to drink all she wanted of milk, and to spread butter on her bread and eat again of Ma's good cottage cheese. There were lettuce leaves to be picked in the garden, too, and little red radishes. She had not realized she was so hungry for these good things to eat. Mrs. McKee and Mattie could not get them, of course, while they were holding down their claim. At home now, there were eggs, too, for Ma's flock was doing well. Laura helped Carrie hunt for nests that the hens hid in the hay at the stable and in the tall grass nearby. Grace found a nest of kittens hidden in the manger. They were grandchildren of the little kitten that Pa had bought for 50 cents, and Kitty felt her responsibility. She thought that she could hunt for them as well as for her own kittens. She brought in more gophers than all of them could eat, and every day she piled the extra ones by the house door for Ma. "I declare," Ma said, "I never was so embarrassed by a cat's generosity." The day came when Mary was coming home. Pa and Ma drove to town to fetch her, and even the train seemed special that afternoon as it came at last, unrolling its black smoke into a melting line low on the sky. From the rise of ground behind the stable in the garden, they saw the white steam puff up from its engine and heard its whistle. Its far rumbling was still, and they knew that it had stopped in town and that Mary must be there now. What excitement there was when at last the wagon came up from the slough, with Mary sitting on the seat between Pa and Ma. Laura and Carrie both talked at once, and Mary tried to talk to both at the same time. Grace was in everyone's way, her hair flying and her blue eyes wide. Kitty went out through the doorway like a streak, with her tail swelled to a big brush. Kitty did not like strangers, and she had forgotten Mary. "Weren't you afraid to come all by yourself on the cars?" Carrie asked. "Oh, no," Mary smiled. "I had no trouble. We learned to do things by ourselves at college. It is part of our education." She did seem much more sure of herself, and she moved easily around the house instead of sitting quiet in her chair. Pa brought in her trunk, and she went to it, knelt down, and unlocked and opened it, quite as if she saw it. Then she took from it, one after another, the presents she had bought. For Ma, there was a lamp mat of woven braid, with a fringe all round it of many-colored beads strung on stout thread. "It's beautiful," Ma said in delight. Laura's gift was a bracelet of blue and white beads strung on thread and woven together, and Carrie's was a string of pink and white beads interwoven. "Oh, how pretty, how pretty!" Carrie exclaimed. "And it fits, too, it fits perfectly." For Grace, there was a little doll's chair of red and green beads strung on wire. Grace was so overcome as she took it carefully in her hands that she could hardly say thank you to Mary. "This is for you, Pa," Mary said as she gave him a blue silk handkerchief. "I didn't make this, but I chose it myself. Blanche and I, Blanche is my roommate. We went downtown to find something for you. She can see colors if they are bright, but the clerk didn't know it. We thought it would be fun to mystify him. So Blanche signaled the colors to me, and he thought we could tell them by touch. I knew by the feeling that it was good silk. My, we did fool that clerk." And remembering, Mary laughed. Mary had often smiled, but it was a long time since they had heard her laugh out, as she used to when she was a little girl. All that it had cost to send Mary to college was more than repaid by seeing her so gay and content. "I bet this is the prettiest handkerchief in Vinton, Iowa," Pa said. "I don't see how you put the right colors into your beadwork," Laura said, turning the bracelet on her wrist. "Every little bead in this lovely bracelet is right. You can't do that by fooling a clerk." "Some seeing person puts the different colors in separate boxes," Mary explained. "Then we only have to remember where they are." "You can do that easily," Laura agreed. "You always could remember things. You know, I never could say as many Bible verses as you." "It surprises my Sunday school teacher now how many of them I know," said Mary. "Knowing them was a great help to me, Ma. I can read them so easily with my fingers in raised print and in Braille that I learned how to read everything sooner than anyone else in my class." "I'm glad to know that, Mary," was all that Ma said, and her smile trembled, for she looked happier than when Mary had given her the beautiful lamp mat. Here's my braille slate, said Mary, lifting it from her trunk. It was an oblong of thin steel in a steel frame, as large as a school slate, with a narrow steel band across it. The band was cut into several rows of open squares, and it would slide up and down or could be fastened in place at any point. Tied to the frame by a string was a pencil-shaped piece of steel that Mary said was a stylus. How do you use it? Pa wanted to know. Watch and I'll show you, said Mary. They all watched while she laid a sheet of thick, cream-colored paper on the slate under the slide. She moved the slip to the top of the frame and secured it there. Then, with the point of the stylus, she pressed rapidly here and there in the corners of the open squares. There, she said, slipping the paper out and turning it over. Wherever the stylus had pressed, there was a tiny bump that could easily be felt with the fingers. The bumps made different patterns, the size of the squares, and these were the Braille letters. I'm writing to Blanche to tell her that I'm safely home, said Mary. I must write to my teacher, too. She turned the paper over, put it in the frame again, and slipped the slide down, ready to go on writing on the blank space. I will finish them later. It's wonderful that you can write to your friends and they can read your letters, said Ma. I can hardly believe that you are really getting the college education that we always wanted you to have. Laura was so happy that she felt like crying, too. Well, well, Pa broke in. Here we stand talking when Mary must be hungry and it's chore time. Let's do our work now and we'll have longer to talk afterward. You're right, Charles, Ma quickly agreed. Supper will be ready by the time you are ready for it. While Pa took care of the horses, Laura hurried to do the milking, and Carrie made a quick fire to bake the biscuit that Ma was mixing. Supper was ready when Pa came from the stable, and Laura had strained the milk. It was a happy family, all together again as they ate the browned hashed potatoes, poached fresh eggs, and delicious biscuit with Ma's good butter. Pa and Ma drank their fragrant tea, but Mary drank milk with the other girls. It is a treat, she said. We don't have such good milk at college. There was so much to ask and tell that almost nothing was fully said, but tomorrow would be another long day with Mary. And it was like old times again when Laura and Mary went to sleep as they used to, in their bed where Laura for so long had been sleeping alone. It's warm weather, Mary said, so I won't be putting my cold feet on you as I used to do. I'm so glad you're here that I wouldn't complain, Laura answered. It would be a pleasure. Little House on the Prairie series by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Book 8. These Happy Golden Years. Chapter 16. Summer Days. It was such a joy to have Mary at home that the summer days were not long enough for all their pleasures. Listening to Mary's stories of her life in college, reading aloud to her, planning and sewing to put her clothes in order, and once more going with her for long walks in the late afternoon, made the time go by too swiftly. One Saturday morning, Laura went to town to match Mary's last winter's best dress in silk, to make a new collar and cuffs. She found just what she wanted in a new milliner's and dressmaker's shop, and while Miss Bell was wrapping the little package, she said to Laura, I hear you're a good sewer. I wish you would come and help me. I'll pay you 50 cents a day from 7 o'clock to 5 if you'll bring your dinner. Laura looked around the pleasant new place with the pretty hats in 2 windows, bolts of ribbon and a glass showcase, and silks and velvets on the shelves behind it. There was a sewing machine with an unfinished dress lying across it, and another lay on a chair nearby. You can see there's more work here than I can do, Miss Bell said in her quiet voice. Miss Bell was a young woman, and Laura thought her handsome with her tall figure and dark hair and eyes. Laura decided that it would be pleasant to work with her. I will come if Ma's willing I should, she promised. Come Monday morning if you can, said Miss Bell. Laura left the shop and went up the street to the post office to mail a letter for Mary. There she met Mary Power, who was on her way to do an errand at the lumber yard. They'd not seen each other since the buggy ride in early spring, and there was so much to talk about that Mary begged Laura to come with her. All right, I will, said Laura. I'd like to ask Mr. McKee how Mrs. McKee and Mattie are getting along anyway. They walked slowly, talking all the way up the street, across the cindery railroad tracks and the dusty street to the corner of the lumber yard, and there they stood talking. A yoke of oxen was coming slowly into town on the country road from the north, hauling a lumber wagon. A man walked beside the farther oxen, and Laura idly watched him as he swung a long whip. The oxen trudged along until nearly to the corner, then started ahead quickly. Laura and Mary stepped back. The man commanded, "Ho! Ha!" But the oxen did not turn left. They swung to the right around the corner. "Gee then, go where you're a mind to," the driver ordered them, impatiently but joking. Then he looked at the girls and they exclaimed together, "Almanzo Wilder!" He raised his hat with a cheerful flourish to them and hurried along the street with the oxen. "I didn't know him without his horses," Laura laughed. "And the way he was dressed," Mary disparaged him, "in those rough clothes and ugly heavy shoes. He's likely breaking sod, and that is why he had oxen. He wouldn't work prince and lady so hard," Laura explained, more to herself than to Mary Power. "Everybody is working," Mary remarked. "Nobody can have any fun in the summertime. But Nellie Olson is going to ride behind those horses yet, if she possibly can. You know the Olsons' claim is a little way east of the Wilder boys' claims." "Have you seen her lately?" Laura asked. "I never see anybody," Mary answered. "All the girls are out on their father's claims, and Cap is teaming every day. Ben Woodsworth is working at the depot, and nobody can get a word with Frank Hawthorne nowadays. He works all the time in the store since his father has made him a partner. Minnie and Arthur are out with their folks on their homestead, and here I haven't seen you since early April." "Never mind, we'll see each other all next spring. Besides, I'm coming to town to work if Ma says I may," and Laura told Mary that she expected to sew for Miss Bell. Suddenly, she saw that the sun was almost overhead. She stopped only a moment at the yard office to hear from Mr. McKee and that Mrs. McKee and Mattie were getting along all right, though they still missed her. Then quickly she said goodbye to Mary and hurried away on her walk home. She had stayed in town too long. Though she walked so fast that she was almost running, dinner was ready when she reached home. "I'm sorry I stayed so long, but so many things happened," she made excuse. "Yes?" Ma inquired, and Carrie asked, "What happened?" Laura told of meeting Mary Power and of seeing Mr. McKee. "I visited too long with Mary Power," she confessed. "The time went so quickly I did not know it was so late." Then she told the rest. "Miss Bell wants me to work for her in her shop. May I, Ma?" "Why, Laura, I declare I don't know," Ma exclaimed. "You've only just got home." "She'll pay me 50 cents a day from 7 o'clock to 5 if I bring my own dinner," Laura told them.
"That's fair enough," said Pa. "You take your own dinner, but you get off an hour early."
"But you came home to be with Mary," Ma objected. "I know, Ma, but I'll see her every night and morning and all day Sunday," Laura argued. "I don't know why, but I feel I ought to be earning something."
"That's the way it is once you begin to earn," Pa said.
"I'll be earning $3 a week," said Laura, "and seeing Mary, too. We'll have lots of time to do things together, won't we, Mary?" "Yes, and I'll do all your housework while you're gone," Mary offered. "Then on Sundays we'll have our walks."
"That reminds me, the new church is done," said Pa. "We must all go to church tomorrow morning."
"Oh, I'm so glad to see the new church. I can hardly believe there is one," Mary said.
"It's there, sure enough," Pa assured her. "We'll see for ourselves tomorrow."
"And the next day?" Laura asked. "Yes, you may go to work for Miss Bell. You can try it for a while anyway," Ma said. Sunday morning, Pa hitched the horses to the wagon and they all rode to church. It was large and new, with long seats that were comfortable to sit in. Mary liked it very much after the small chapel at cottage, but she knew hardly anyone there. On the way home, she said, "There are so many strangers."
"They come and they go," Pa told her. "No sooner do I get acquainted with a newcomer than he sells the relinquishment of his claim and goes on west, or else his family can't stand it here and he sells out and moves back east. The few that stick are so busy that we don't have time to know each other."
"It doesn't matter," Mary said. "I will soon be going back to college, and I know everyone there." After the Sunday dinner, when the work was done, Carrie sat down to read the Youth's Companion. Grace went to play with the kittens in the clean grass near the door. Ma rested in her rocking chair by the open window, and Pa lay down for his Sunday nap. When Laura said, "Come, Mary, let's go for our walk," they walked across the prairie to the south, and all along their way the wild June roses were blooming.
Laura gathered them until she filled Mary's arm with all she could hold. Oh, how sweet, Mary kept saying. I've missed the spring violets, but nothing is sweeter than prairie roses. They're so good to be home again, Laura, even if I can't stay long. We have until the middle of August, said Laura, but the roses won't last that long. Gather ye roses while ye may, Mary began. She quoted the poem for Laura. Then, as they walked together in this rose-scented warm wind, she talked of her studies in literature. I'm planning to write a book someday, she confided. Then she laughed. But I plan to teach school, and you're doing that for me, so maybe you will write the book. I write a book? Laura hooted. She said blithely, I'm going to be an old maid schoolteacher like Miss Wilder. Write your own book. What are you going to write about? But Mary was diverted from the subject of books. She inquired, Where's that Wilder boy that Ma wrote me about? It seems like he'd be around sometime. I think he's too busy on his claim. Everybody is busy, Laura answered. She did not mention seeing him in town. For some reason that she could not explain, she felt shy of talking about it. She and Mary turned and went rather quietly back to the house, bringing into it the fragrance of the roses they carried. Swiftly the summer went by. Every weekday Laura walked to town in the early morning, carrying her lunch pail. Often Paul walked with her, for he was doing carpenter work on new buildings that newcomers were building. Laura could hear the hammers and saws while she sewed steadily all day long, pausing only to eat her cold lunch at noon. Then, often with Pa, she walked home again. Sometimes there was a pain between her shoulders from bending over her work. That always disappeared during the walk, and then came the happy evening at home. At supper, she told all she had seen and heard in Miss Bell's shop. Pa told any news he had gathered, and they all talked of the happenings on the claim and in the house. How the crops were growing, how Ma was getting along with Mary's sewing, how many eggs Grace had found, and that the old speckled hen had stolen her nest and just come off with 20 chicks. It was at the supper table that Ma reminded them that tomorrow was 4th of July. What are we going to do about it?
I don't see that we can do anything, Caroline. No way that I know of to prevent tomorrow's being the 4th,
Pa teased. Now, Charles, Ma reproached him, smiling. Are we going to the celebration? There was silence around the table. I cannot hear you when you all talk at once, Ma teased in her turn. If we are going, we must think about it tonight. I've been so enjoying having Mary here that I forgot about the 4th, and nothing is prepared for a celebration. My whole vacation is a celebration, and it seems to me enough, Mary said quietly. I've been in town every day. It would be a treat to me to miss a day, then Laura added, but there are Carrie and Grace. Paul laid down his knife and fork.
I'll tell you what. Caroline, you and the girls cook a good dinner. I'll go to town in the morning and get some candy and firecrackers. We will have our own 4th of July celebration right here at home. What do you say to that?
Get lots of candy, Pa, Grace begged. Then Carrie urged, and lots of firecrackers. Everyone had such a good time next day that they all agreed it was much more fun than going to town. Once or twice, Laura wondered if Almanzo Wilder were in town with the brown horses, and the thought of Nellie Olson just crossed her mind. But if Almanzo wanted to see her again, he knew where she was. It was not her place to do anything about it, and she didn't intend to. All too soon, the summer was gone. In the last week of August, Mary went back to college, leaving an emptiness in the house. Now Pa cut the oats and wheat with his old hand cradle, because the fields were still so small that they would not pay for having a harvester. When the corn was ripe, he cut it and shocked it in the field. He was thin and tired from all the hard work he had done in town and in the fields, and he was restless because people were settling the country so thickly.
I would like to go west, he told Ma one day. A fellow doesn't have room to breathe here anymore.
Oh, Charles, no room with all this great prairie around you, Ma said. I was so tired of being dragged from pillar to post, and I thought we were settled here.
Well, I guess we are, Caroline. Don't fret. It's just that my wandering foot gets an itching, I guess. Anyway, I haven't won that bet with Uncle Sam yet, and we stay right here till we win it, till I can prove up on this homestead claim.
Laura knew how he felt, for she saw the look in his blue eyes as he gazed over the rolling prairie westward from the open door where he stood. He must stay in a settled country for the sake of them all, just as she must teach school again, though she did so hate to be shut into a schoolroom.